My wife had been gone 11 days. The funeral was behind me. The casseroles from neighbors were still sitting in my fridge untouched. And here was this man in a gray suit sliding a key across a conference table like it was nothing. He said it was to a property in Harlan County, a farmhouse, about 2 hours east. I didn't know what to say, so I just picked it up. I'd been married to Carol for 19 years. I thought I knew the shape of her life pretty well. The routines, the habits, the little things. She drank her coffee black. She kept the thermostat at 68. She called her sister every Sunday around 7. I knew all of it. But she had never once mentioned a farmhouse, not in passing, not in an argument, not even in one of those half-asleep conversations people have when their guard is down. Nothing. The lawyer, his name was Pressman, explained that the property had been in her name alone since before we were married.
Sighs. He said it like that made it ordinary. Like wives hide real estate from their husbands all the time, and it's just a paperwork thing. I drove home with the key in my cup holder and kept glancing at it at red lights. That night, I looked up the address. The satellite image showed a farmhouse surrounded by trees, isolated, no neighbors close by. I remember thinking, why would she need a place like that? I want to be clear about something before I get into what I found. Carol wasn't a secretive person, or at least, she never seemed like one. She was organized, practical, the kind of woman who kept a whiteboard calendar in the kitchen and color-coded it by category. She paid bills early. She returned phone calls the same day. There was nothing scattered or mysterious about how she moved through life. That's what made the farmhouse hard to process. We met in 2004 through mutual friends at a cookout in Lexington. She was quiet at first, but once she got comfortable, she was sharp. Funny in a dry way. We dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony at her parents' place, bought a house in Louisville, and just built a life. Nothing dramatic. Good years, mostly. She worked as an office manager for a dental group. I'm in commercial insurance. We weren't rich, but we were stable. Took one vacation a year, usually somewhere warm. Argued about the usual things. Money sometimes. Her family occasionally. Nothing that ever felt serious enough to leave a mark. But there were moments. Looking back now, I can see them more clearly than I could at the time. Little pauses in conversation when certain topics came up. A vagueness around her life before we met that I always chalked up to personality. She didn't like talking about the past. I respected that. I never pushed. There was one time, maybe 8 years in, when I mentioned driving through Harlan County for work. She changed the subject so fast I almost didn't notice. Almost. I waited 4 days before I went. I'm not sure why I waited. Maybe I needed to feel ready. Maybe part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. I told myself I was being practical. I had to go eventually, had to assess the property before deciding whether to sell or deal with it some other way. That's what I told myself. I left Louisville on a Tuesday morning around 7. Took I-64 east, then cut south. The landscape changes out that way. Gets quieter. More trees, fewer towns, longer stretches of nothing between gas stations. I'd driven through that part of the state before, but never paid much attention to it. I had the address typed into my phone. The route took me down a county road that turned to gravel about a mile before the destination. Trees on both sides, thick enough that the morning light was coming through in pieces. The farmhouse appeared at the end of a long, flat drive. It was older than I expected. White paint, weathered badly. A covered porch across the front. A detached garage off to the right, doors shut. The grass around the property had been cut recently. That detail stopped me. I sat in my car for a few minutes just looking at it. Someone had been maintaining this place. The lawn didn't cut itself. The small flower bed along the porch edge had been tended to as well. Nothing wild, nothing overgrown. I thought about calling Pressman and asking him about it. Instead, I got out of the car, walked up to the front door, and put the key in the lock. It turned on the first try. The smell hit me before my eyes adjusted. Not bad, just old, wood smoke and something faintly floral like dried lavender. The kind of smell that tells you a space has been lived in, but not recently. I stepped into a small entry hall and stood there, letting the room come into focus. It was furnished. Fully. That was the first thing that registered. I don't know what I expected. Maybe empty rooms, dust, nothing. But this place had furniture, rugs, framed pictures on the walls, a couch with throw pillows, a coffee table with a few books stacked on it, a lamp in the corner. Someone had decorated this place, carefully. I walked slowly into the main room and started looking at the photographs on the walls. Some were landscapes, printed and framed simply, but others were personal. A woman I didn't recognize standing in front of the porch outside. An older couple, maybe 60s, sitting at a kitchen table laughing at something off camera. And then I saw one that made me stop completely. Carol, younger, maybe mid-20s, before I knew her. She was standing in the yard outside this exact house, squinting into the sun, smiling in a way I recognized but couldn't quite place. Next to her was a boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She had her arm around him. I stood there holding that frame for a long time. I set it down carefully, face up on the coffee table, and kept moving through the house room by room. By the time I reached the back bedroom, I understood that I had not known my wife at all. There was a child's room at the end of the hall, small bed with a navy blue comforter, a dresser with stickers on the bottom drawer, shelves along one wall with books and a few action figures arranged neatly, a poster of a baseball team above the bed. Everything organized like a parent had done it, like someone cared about how it looked. I sat down on the edge of that small bed and just breathed for a minute. The boy in the photograph, the maintained lawn, a house Carol had kept secret for our entire marriage. I was building a picture I didn't want to finish. I went back through every room more carefully this time. In the kitchen, I found a drawer with documents, utility bills in Carol's name going back over a decade, a school calendar from 3 years ago with dates circled in red pen, a birthday card signed at the bottom in a child's handwriting. "Thanks, Mom. Love, Danny." Danny. I set the card down flat on the counter and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the yard. She had a son. Somewhere. A boy named Danny who had slept in that room and signed birthday cards and had no idea, as far as I knew, that his mother was gone. I called Pressman from the kitchen. He wasn't surprised by my questions. That bothered me more than anything. He said Carol had left specific instructions. He said there were things she wanted me to know, but had arranged to tell me in a particular order. He asked me to come back to his office Monday morning. I agreed. Then I sat down at Carol's kitchen table and didn't move for a long time. Pressman's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. He had a folder on his desk when I sat down, thick, tabbed, like he'd been preparing for this meeting for a while. Maybe he had. He told me Carol had come to him 14 months ago. She'd updated her will, restructured the property documents, and left a sealed letter with instructions for how to handle things if she died before she was ready to tell me herself. He slid the letter across the desk, her handwriting on the envelope. My name. Just Greg in blue ink. I didn't open it there. I put it in my jacket pocket and asked Pressman to explain what he could explain without it. He said Danny was 22 years old now. He said Carol had him when she was 19, before she'd finished school, before she'd moved to Lexington, before any of the life I knew her from had started. She'd placed him with her cousin's family in Harlan County when he was 2. An informal arrangement, not adoption. She stayed involved quietly, visited when she could, kept the farmhouse as a place that was his in some way. She never told me because she was afraid of how I'd react. That's what Pressman said, reading carefully from his notes. I sat with that for a moment, afraid of how I'd react. 19 years, and she thought she couldn't tell me. I asked if Danny knew about me. Pressman said he knew Carol had remarried. He didn't know my name or anything specific. I nodded slowly and stood up. I had a lot to think about before I read that letter. I read it that night at my kitchen table in Louisville. 4 pages, front and back, in Carol's careful handwriting. She wrote the way she talked, direct, no extra words, no dramatic build-up. Just information delivered as honestly as she could manage. She'd gotten pregnant at 19 from a relationship that ended badly. The man wasn't someone she wanted in Danny's life. Her family wasn't in a position to help. Her cousin Linda and Linda's husband had offered to raise him in a stable home, and Carol had made the hardest decision of her life at an age when most people are still figuring out basic things. She wrote that she never stopped being his mother. She visited when she could arrange it without raising questions. She paid for things quietly. She kept the farmhouse maintained so Danny would always have something tangible from her when the time came. She said she'd planned to tell me. Multiple times over the years she had rehearsed it. But the longer she waited, the harder it became, and eventually she buried it so deep that digging it back up felt impossible. She wasn't asking me to forgive her. She was clear about that. She was asking me to find Danny. She wrote that he was a good person. Quiet, she said. Responsible. Working a trade job somewhere outside of Harlan. She said he didn't have much family left since Linda had passed 2 years prior. She said he didn't know she was sick. I stopped reading there. She'd known she was sick. Before the accident, before any of this, she had already known something was wrong. The accident just got there first. I found him through Pressman, who had a phone number in the file. I called on a Wednesday evening. It rang 4 times and I almost hung up. Then a young man answered. Quiet voice, cautious the way people are when they don't recognize the number. I told him my name was Greg. I told him I had been married to Carol Whitfield for 19 years. I told him I was sorry for what I was about to tell him and that I wished the circumstances were different. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said he'd wondered why she'd stopped returning his calls. We talked for almost 2 hours that first night. He was 22, working HVAC installation, living in a small rental outside of Harlan. He was measured and careful with his words in a way that reminded me of her. Same dry pauses, same way of thinking before speaking. He didn't cry on the phone, neither did I. We met in person 3 weeks later at the farmhouse. I brought the photograph I'd found, the one of Carol and him in the yard when he was small. He held it for a long time without saying anything. I told him the property was his. That's what Carol had wanted, and I wasn't going to complicate it. He said he didn't know what to say. I told him he didn't have to say anything. We sat on that porch for a long time in the quiet, 2 strangers connected by a woman who hadn't known how to bridge the distance between the parts of her life while she was living it. She found a way anyway. In the end, I think that has to count for something. I think about Danny out there now in that farmhouse carrying forward something she built quietly over a lifetime. That's the whole story. Nothing left out, nothing added.